Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Get Unhooked for Families coaching call. My name is Jason Coombs, and I'm the founder of Brickhouse Recovery, which is a nationally accredited drug and alcohol treatment center in Idaho, throughout Idaho. And I'm also the author of Unhooked, which is how to help an addicted loved one recover. And today, we are going to build off of where we've been in the last few weeks. And you're not going to want to miss the next probably 6 sessions. This next 6 weeks, what we're going to build upon are going to answer a lot of the questions that many of you on this call have asked me. And we have people from all over the country that are joining us. And people will watch this ongoing on the recordings, and hopefully you can refer back to these calls and sessions to help guide you when you are in these stages. So what I would like to tee up in terms of where we're going is we are going to address the question, how do I navigate relapse? The topic of relapse will set us up for a lot of benefits in terms of meat and how to support someone who is in active addiction, who's on a runner, which is a period of use, or a bender. How do we navigate someone who has reverted in the stages of change and their actions basically shatter all of our trust again that we were building? And and how do we manage our expectations in that storm and find that pocket of peace that I've mentioned in the past through the process of surrender? And how do you do surrender? It's easy to say the word. It's not so easy to choose surrender, and it's not so easy to feel surrender, which is the ultimate goal, is to feel surrender, which feels like peace and faith and trust that God has a better plan and outcome for our lives and our addicted loved ones' lives than we do. So you're not going to want to miss where we're going with this. So by way of setting the stage, after I experienced years of loss and struggle as a cause of my addictions, at this point, I had lost my marriage. I had placed my firstborn child in the arms of another family to raise by way of adoption. I had experienced a winter homeless. I had lived out of my car for periods of time over the years. I had experienced failing 4 rehabs, some inpatient, some outpatient. I had spent the majority of the year of 2006 incarcerated, and was facing prison time, and successfully graduated drug court. And the day I graduated drug court was the day that my substance use disorder came back alive. And I had made commitments to myself, to God, to my family, to the judge, and I made a beautiful speech at my drug court graduation, and my life was seemingly getting better in a lot of ways. I still remember going to lunch with my parents afterwards, and my dad gave me a very sweet, generous gift to celebrate my graduation, and so did my mom, and they bought me lunch, and they told me how proud of me they were, because it had been a long, long road. And after that lunch, I got a text message from one of my coworkers. This is a different coworker than the one that got me in trouble the first time. This is a guy who I worked selling Toyotas with. And they wanted to celebrate, he and another coworker wanted to celebrate my graduation. And so they had reserved some rooms out in Wendover, Nevada, which is the party destination for those that live in the northern Utah area. And so I said, all right, let's go, let's celebrate. So we went out, and the thought that I could just have one Long Island iced tea while gambling was crossed my mind. And I never really got in trouble for alcohol. It was always the drugs, and I got in trouble because I was under the thumb of drug court. And my charges, as you remember, from being a patient of Utah's largest Oxycontin drug ring, and all those felonies had now been reduced to misdemeanors because I completed drug court. So I was finally done with the court stuff. So my external motivation lifted. I didn't have to be sober anymore because of the law. I could drink just like you can drink. I mean, there was no issue. So I took a drink, and like an allergy, the addict voice came back, and I had an abnormal reaction, physiologically and mentally. It ignited the craving, and the addict voice took over. And before I knew it, that night I had been kicked out of a club for disorderly conduct. I had blown $1,000. I had spent most of that on cocaine and a lot of other things that I won't go into. And I woke up the next day just blown away with shame and embarrassment. And that hole that I was in the next morning is the very feeling that every addict wants to run from and not feel. And so the quickest way to numb that out was, I gotta get something in my system. I've got to drink something, take something, buy something, use something. And so the use continued, and the party was over. But that long drive back across the desert to Salt Lake City, it's about a 3-hour drive or so. I haven't been there since I've been sober, thank goodness. So yeah, that was a long, heavy-hearted drive, especially because I just blew $1,000, and I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills and stuff. So I was back in a world of self-hate, self-condemnation, and that's what I want to talk about, is why, after I went through all that pain and suffering the years prior, would I make the decision to drink that Long Island iced tea after I made commitments to my son Nathan, to God, to myself, to my family? That's where family members smack their forehead and say, what were you thinking? So it escalated over the course of the next few months, and before I knew it, I was back out. Well, I was almost out of my apartment because I couldn't pay rent. I owed my dealer a significant amount of money. I continued to tell him I would pay him back later. This was the experience where I went to meet him, and he pulled up to the curbside. I got out and went up to his window, and I still owed him money. And he said, "You have the money, right?" in his accent. And I put my hand in my pocket and grabbed a knife. And I said, "I'll pay you back later." And then he drove off with me hanging on his window. And then he threw out some balloons out the window, balloons of crack and heroin. And I let go, and he almost ran me over. And I was looking in the gutter and in the snow for the drugs. And that was where that relapse took me. Now, what I want to talk about and read is how do we as family members understand that process better. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about procrastination too, because the thing about that stage that I was in is I genuinely didn't want to continue that life. It's not like I went back to pre-contemplation and decided that I was going to live that life again and that I didn't have a problem. But I think a lot of times behaviors look like pre-contemplation, but internally I'm not there. And my parents and my loved ones might assume the wrong stage of change. And I think that that's really important for you to note. So I would like to, I was going to play the audio version of this, and maybe I will. Maybe I'll, let me toss, Jen, I'm gonna just toss to you. I would love to hear what you're thinking while I find the audio version as we read along of this section on page 164 of Unhooked.
As I'm listening to your story, I'm thinking to myself how unmanageable the disease of addiction is. And sometimes as family members, we can't fully grasp the actual unmanageability of somebody's addiction. I mean, we can see it externally, like in their eyes, but I don't think that we can begin, or I can't articulate what that feels like inside. So it's really interesting, as most of you know, we recently went through a relapse with my son. And so when you're talking about what it's like for a loved one to relapse, and we've heard a lot of us talk about sort of the trust that's broken in that time, and what we do. And when you start talking about that, the first thing that came to my mind was my ability to make friends with the worst case scenario. That is what surrender looks like for me. When I understand that I've made friends with the worst case scenario, and I am not in control of the outcome, that is where I have been able to surrender. And so I listen, there's a surrender when you hear about somebody's addiction story about the addict surrendering, and then there's a surrendering of the family. And those are very different surrendering processes. And one does not control the other, really, right? They're completely independent of one another. So I don't know if you found your audio, Jason Coombs, but that is what I, right off the top of my mind, I've been thinking about since you shared that piece of your story.
Awesome. Jen, I was listening to what you're saying, and what you nailed is really important, is that we don't understand the level of not only their pain and addiction, but we don't really understand the spot that someone's in the stages of change, often in addiction, because a lot of times behaviors don't necessarily mirror what stage they're in, right? And that can be tricky because we see that all the time with our clients, where they appear like they are in action, doing all the right thing, hyper recovery, but they are unwilling to open themselves up for the true experience. And it's more of a compliance play. And so internally, they don't think they need to change because they got it licked. So they're in pre-contemplation about recovery, but they might be getting the gold stars in treatment because they're doing all the things. Or the reverse, the reverse. They might be further along in the stages of change in preparation, but they look like they don't care and they do not want to be a part of recovery at all. So I'm gonna just share this screen here. Jen, since I can see you, can you see the book? All right. It's on the wrong screen for me. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to back up like a couple of paragraphs because we're leading into relapse. And I think it's important to remember where I was at this point, which was a drug-induced psychosis, barricaded myself in my little crack house with my cat. And this was right after the DEA was at they had raided my first dealer, and I went to my second dealer's house. And when they opened the door at my dealer's house, they pulled me inside and threw me up against the wall. And I saw, all my dealers on the ground in handcuffs in Indian style. It was a big old ring from Honduras, the Honduran heroin ring. And anyway, that's what led up to this insanity, because they let me go. And then I'm going to play this. Oh, one thing I need to do is I need to switch my mic here. Okay, Jen, I'm going to look. Jen, I'm going to look at you to make sure that you guys can hear this. I'm going to switch the mic. Okay.
They showed me loving support and offered to send me pictures while I was in treatment for encouragement. I tried not to cry at their benevolence as I watched Nathan start to play, not just walking, but running with ambling steps and not so gracefully swinging his baseball bat at everything. As I watched my boy, there was something inside of me that kept calling me to better things. After all the times my addiction called me back, I was now prepared to do whatever I needed to do to achieve real recovery. I became willing to try. I wanted it on my own volition once again, but this time it was sincerer than ever before. Relapse. In my journey, I recycled through the stages of change and I experienced multiple relapses. With each failure, my shame and embarrassment compounded. My family was baffled, but nobody was as baffled as I was. What happened to my rock solid? I had made excellent progress in my sobriety a couple of times, but something would trigger me and that's all it would take. I lacked emotional sobriety. We have all asked ourselves why someone would choose to get loaded after it caused so much pain and suffering. Why would he decide to have one more drink? What were they thinking? For me, personally, two major factors that contributed to my continual relapses were my environment and lifestyle. I did not protect my sobriety. Therefore, I put myself in risky situations around people who were not supportive of recovery. It's been said that we become the average of the 5 people we spend time with. Since I hung out with drinkers, I eventually drank. In the rooms of recovery, we advise each new person to stick with the winners. For far too long, I hung around people who did not help me protect my efforts in sobriety. Additionally, because my lifestyle was geared toward a selfish pursuit of wealth, accolades, and counterfeit happiness, I lacked the humility and willingness to surrender my life to the process of change. I did not continue the actions necessary to put my disease into remission on a daily basis, so I was a dry drunk for weeks or months at a time. Again, I lacked emotional sobriety. Inevitably, my addiction flared up again and again and again. Fortunately, the majority of relapsers do not give up on recovery for good. We may fall apart for a period of time, then get ourselves together, but we will try again and again. This cycle is what makes addiction so frustrating. We are a resilient bunch, and we will fight, even if we only rely on our own self-will, which is insufficient. In Changing for Good, Dr. Prochaska states, although relapse is never desirable, our view is that change is often circular and difficult. The spiral cycle of change shows how contemplation, preparation, and action usually follow relapse. Relapsers most often take one step backward in order to take two steps forward. In other words, we need not panic when our loved ones relapse. This does not mean that he is back to the beginning. This is often a part of the journey. It undoubtedly was a part of mine. Some recyclers, however, become so demoralized after a relapse that they cease to make the effort to get sober again, and they give in to their disease. They look at themselves as total failures. Guilt, shame, and embarrassment take over. Respectfully, some addicted people have grave emotional and mental illnesses, and they are plagued beyond understanding. For those in this category, intense work with psychiatrists and mental health professionals are needed to overcome an addiction. Silver linings. There are silver linings when we seek after them. A short relapse will sometimes resolve a person's ambivalence about sobriety, moving them through the stages toward action. For example, last holiday season, one of my female clients named Grace came into my office distressed and irritable. She was a 37-year-old woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. Her husband and children supported her recovery. However, she has been stuck in contemplation for years. As she sat down, I smiled and asked, "What's the matter?" She let out a big sigh like she was about to share some sad news to me. "Jason, I want to pause my treatment until after the Christmas holiday and New Year's Eve. I know I am going to drink, and I do not want to feel guilty about it. There will be a lot of alcohol at my family parties over the holidays, and I can't resist. Please don't be mad because I really do want to be sober, but just not during the holidays." Instead of a forceful attempt at persuasion and a list of things she should do, I decided to dance, not wrestle. While rolling with her reasoning, I reflected back to her what I had just heard to make sure I understood her correctly. "So Grace, just to make sure I understand you, the holidays are not an ideal time to attempt sobriety, and you would like to resume drinking until after New Year's and then get sober? Am I correct?" "Yes," she sheepishly replied. "Got it. Many people feel this internal struggle, especially this time of year. I totally validate your feelings," I said. She let out a sigh of relief, as if she was expecting a different reaction from me. I relaxed back in my chair to help calm her even more. "Remind me, when we first met, what were your primary reasons for getting sober in the first place?" Grace thought for a few seconds while looking up at my family photos placed on my filing cabinet in my office. "Yes, I do remember. I don't want to be hungover on Christmas morning. I want to be present with my kids and give them the best Christmas ever. Last year, I was miserable, and the holidays were a mess because of my drinking. I promised myself and my family that would never happen again." I let her words marinate for a few moments, then asked, "Why is that important to you?" I could tell she wasn't sure anymore. She was ambivalent. For the rest of the meeting, we explored her ambivalence about the pros and cons of staying sober now as opposed to drinking now and trying it again after New Year's. For 20 minutes, I simply asked her open-ended questions, validated her feelings, and illuminated her options as best I could. Basically, I gave her a safe space to explore her reasons until she made the decision to focus on her sobriety, stick with her commitment to be present for her kids, and in her words, power through the holidays. She felt relieved after making that decision to do the right thing. It was a good sign, but I knew it wasn't over. The next morning, Grace woke up feeling depressed. She instantly changed her mind. Instead of fighting for her sobriety, she grabbed her keys, hopped in her car, and raced down to the liquor store before she changed her mind again. That day, she drank herself into another blackout. The following day, she called me in tears and told me what had happened. She expressed the embarrassment, guilt, and shame she felt. She was sick to her stomach about it. I asked her to come meet with me again to continue our conversation about what happened. Believe it or not, something powerfully positive came out of that relapse. For her, the relapse clarified what she did not want in her life, which was alcohol. She beautifully articulated that the consequences of drinking again far outweighed the benefits. She was able to identify the lies she told herself leading up to the drink. She also articulated that this painful experience helped her decide to stay sober going forward and to do whatever it took to never drink again. She took one step backwards in order to take two steps forward. After the relapse, she sprang into the preparation stage of change and became ready to take action. Immediately after the relapse, she canceled her party with her drinking friends. Then she told everyone in her family that she was working on her recovery and asked for their help at the Christmas Eve party. They all rallied around her and decided the party would be an alcohol-free party. She set herself up for success, and now she is in the action stage. Much credit goes to her family for their support and understanding. In many cases, relapses happen to individuals who are still ambivalent about the costs and the benefits of change. A good example to this is a person who commits to diet and exercise. Commonly, they set a start date for January 1st after the holidays. They work hard to stay committed for about 2 weeks, and suddenly one morning, they decide to sleep in and miss their workout. I'll make it up tomorrow, they'll justify. Then the recycling begins back into old behaviors. The motivation wears off, and the comfort of eating sugar and flour draws them back. Similarly, drug and alcohol relapsers will test the waters because they desperately want to feel the old benefits again. They are trying to find ways to experience the blissful benefits of using, but not reap any of the consequences. If our loved one relapses, it is not the end of the world. A relapse can be used to help him move from one stage to the next. If relapse does happen, it should be channeled and used as a learning experience. Taken in this spirit, it can serve as an incredible springboard to help someone transition from contemplation to preparation and preparation to action as they consider the costs versus the benefits. The end goal of ultimate recovery comes as he successfully transitions through each stage. Let's be patient and remember the 4 C's. 1, we cannot control his addiction. 2, we cannot cure his addiction. 3, we did not cause his addiction. And 4, we can contribute to his addiction or his recovery. Our main goal is to not slip into angry, controlling behaviors. If our external fences are up and our emotional raincoat is on, we can react in a healthy, understanding, and loving way, free from anger and judgment. Remember the powerful principles mentioned before. Empathy. He is a sick man, not a bad man.
Okay. I'm gonna pause it here in the book.
All right, can you hear me, Jen? All right. Then this reviews what we have gone over in the last few weeks. But you guys, when it comes to this particular lesson, there's one that stands out, and that is that in many cases, relapses happen to individuals who are still ambivalent about the costs and the benefits of change. So it really doesn't have anything to do with the promises we make. It doesn't have anything to do with not wanting to have a relationship with our parents and not wanting to live a great life. It has more to do with the ambivalence about the costs and the benefits of change, because as you recall, when one is asked to recover and to be sober, using alcohol might be as much tied into their identity as their gender. Just take the person who drinks alcohol in work settings and in social settings with his golf buddies or her golf buddies, and at family parties like Grace. You know, her whole family system and celebration is around, you know, Christmas Eve parties where there's alcohol, and that's how they celebrate the holidays. And so there is so much more that goes into just saying, hey, stop using. And I use some examples that may not apply to your addicted loved one, but what about your addicted loved one's identity is attached to using? My guess is that the social piece, my guess is the overall mental peace that they feel each day is contingent upon if they drink or use something. You know, deeper things like their self-worth is attached to whether they drink or use. Confidence. All those things that we want to help build not the counterfeit version of, but build the actual version of, like building self-efficacy versus, you know, turning to a substance to feel confidence, or to bring down anxiety or depression. And that's, and the thing about all that is you can spend your life as a family member supporting an addicted loved one, trying to get change to happen. But when you really can step back and recognize how nuanced it is and how powerless we really are, should bring a level of sigh and relief. Because when you feel lack of power, you can then choose to allow a power greater than yourself to take your addicted loved one in his loving arms, and you can actually go through the process of surrender. How do we surrender? That's what we're going to get into in the next few weeks. How do I surrender loved ones that I really care about that are active in their addiction? So I have to apply these principles in my own life, in working with addicted loved ones, because I love my clients, and I know Jennifer loves our clients. We go to bat for our clients. Part of our platform and our spiritual calling in life is to advocate for the beautiful souls that are plagued with substance use disorder, and to rise up and not scapegoat them like the rest of society does, but advocate for their beauty and their gifts, and see if we can draw out those qualities and those beauties and gifts, and not just show them to the world, but draw out those gifts and talents and qualities and assets that are hidden deep down in the caverns of self-hatred, and bring those to light for the individual themselves to start to recognize and to see. And that is a process that human power has limitations on. Human influence has limitations on. And so where can we spend our time to make the most impact at the tip of the sword, so that where we are channeling our energies and our efforts and emotional bandwidth is in the right spot, so that we can know and rest assured that we're doing our part and we are letting go of the outcome, so that we're not trying to control and get back into that being the puppet master of our loved ones. Now I'm speaking about adult addicted loved ones. Adolescent addicted loved ones and adolescent behaviors is a whole other category, but I think these principles absolutely apply. But I would recommend probably me not being the expert in that category because I don't have experience as an adolescent being addicted or a family member who has ever had an adolescent that's addicted. So I just throw that qualification up because I get asked that all the time. Like, well, what about my 13-year-old and how do I do this and that? And you know, I got some ideas on that, but I don't claim to really know the ins and outs of adolescence, even though I worked at an adolescent treatment center. And I have some experience in influencing adolescents. It's very much more of a seed planting, cultivating process than an outcomes-based process, which requires even more surrender. And and where we're going, it's in the process of how do we do surrender, the 7 steps to surrender. I really want you guys, if you're in preparation or action to change yourself and to get to a better spot yourselves, then you will take this suggestion. And I want you to read ahead. You know, feel free to review what we just read in this chapter 9, and then read through those 7 steps to surrender and ponder on them. Because the very first step to surrender is figuring out where we have control and where we don't. And there's a reason that it says figuring out instead of knowing where we have control and where we don't, because you may think you know, I may think I know, but with every individual, when we're dealing with human beings who have a complex history and a complex set of potentially co-occurring disorders and trauma and abuse and education levels and upbringing and environment, figuring out where we have control and where we don't for individuals is a nuanced process. But it's I think it's simpler than we make it. And so as we prepare for the steps to surrender, because you can do everything right, you guys. You can follow the motivational interviewing skills, you can take the course, you can become an instructor, and still may not see the outcome that you wish. And that is where this other piece comes, because surrender is hopeful. It's not throwing in the towel and shutting off your feelings and disowning your loved one to protect your heart. It's not that at all. It's actually the process of personal development in your own faith. And what's rad about that is, in my experience, the more often I surrender outcomes, the outcome I want is more likely to manifest. Let me repeat that. The more often I surrender an outcome, the more likely and more often the outcome I want is manifest. it's the controlling of the outcome that pushes that outcome that I want further and further and further away. Because when I'm manipulating and I'm in fear and I'm in control, that's where trust and rapport are shattered. That's where I'm getting in the way playing God. And I've learned that God plays God way better than I play God. Because God is God, and he loves every one of his children, and I do not have to be the authority on someone else's life. And that is awesome, because he allows that process to play out, and we get to have a backstage pass to a miracle show, even though the hero's journey sometimes they have to go through caverns and caves, and they have to fight the dragons, and they have to get their butts kicked, and they have to get back up, and they have to feel defeated, and the whole hero's journey of triumph and transcending the villain to rise up and to become great, for redemption to happen at the end of the movie is pretty dang cool. And we got to remember that God wins, love wins. All of there's really, like, from an internal perspective, God wins, love wins in this life or the next. And when we have that perspective, we can operate with less fear and control. So stay tuned for next week, because we're going to get into step 1 to surrender. And I appreciate you guys attending. Those of you that are here in person, I'm going to stop the recording and we can have a little Q&A. But for those that are watching the video, thanks for joining us, and come again next week.